the NRA. And I think that any candidate that takes money from the NRA are really selling their constituents short and working for the gun lobby as opposed to public safety.
I live in the south side of Chicago, so guns are an especially important issue here. And I, for one, would like to see some more national legislation because, there's only so much you can do at a state level. So I live very close to Indiana, and it's very easy for guns to come over the border. So no matter how much Illinois might regulate things, it would be great to see some more federal laws.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people go across the border to Gary and buy guns and come back across. We've been looking at some cases up in the Chicago area as well. And you're right. And this is a place where there is a federal role in making sure that these sales are definitely regulated.
I wanted to ask you too about water and access to water. I know that that's something that's important for your district. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that plays into the lives and the livelihoods of the people in your district?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we are a rich agricultural region, and the people that live here take great pride in the fact that we do feed the rest of the nation. And to me, I view that also as a vital national security issue. We have to be able to grow our own food. And one of the issues here locally that's impacting our ability to do that effectively is the fact that we were just out of a 6-7 year drought, and we still have significant issues with making sure that we have the water necessary to grow these crops. And even beyond that, to make sure that we have good, clean drinking water for our communities. We have some outlying areas in the district that have significant issues with respect to contaminated water from lead, pesticides, and other things. And so one of the issues that I've been pushing is to have federal investment in local water projects. And this is something where my opponent has been staunchly opposed to. And he's basically claimed that he's a water champion for the region. But how could that be if he refuses to have any federal funds go to water storage projects for above and below ground? And he's actually sponsored a piece of legislation with a neighboring Congressman, David Valadao, to make sure federal funds don't come here for these water projects. So I've been talking as a centerpiece for my pitch to the voters here is really moving the Central Valley forward. And we can do that by investing in our community, investing in our district, in major infrastructure projects around the areas of water, but also at the same time with respect to transportation. California has a high-speed rail project that has significant funding issues. And if you look around the world, every developed nation that has a high-speed rail project, their federal governments fund the project. You don't ever see a circumstance where a provincial or a state government funding a project of this magnitude. So we need federal resources to help us build these projects. I hope to have water to be included in part of that. And this is something that I think Democrats have traditionally pushed for. You go back to FDR. He helped get us out of the Great Depression by investing in projects that would help in places like the Central Valley canals and dams and things like that. And so I'm pushing very hard to make sure that we have the federal resources necessary to continue growing food for America.
And then I wanted to ask you about immigration as well. You said that your parents were immigrants. Are there a lot of immigrants in the 22nd District? Is this an issue that is a big deal to the residents of that area?
Yes, this is a major local issue for us, and it's an issue for a number of reasons. And I mentioned I grew up as a son of immigrants. I spoke English as a second language, and one of the issues that I had growing up was having to learn English as I started school a little bit behind some of my colleagues. And I see that in a lot of the students today that are going to school speaking English as a second language, learning English for the first time. And so with respect to education, there are significant problems there. We have a large DACA or Dreamer population here, around 7,000 folks eligible to be DACA recipients. And so this is a major issue locally. And there have been studies done that if you were to deport all of these folks, that it would have a severe net negative impact on our local economy. And so even folks that have voted traditionally Republicans, farmers and growers that I've been talking to, have talked about the need for comprehensive immigration reform. We need to figure out a way to make sure that some of these communities and populations have the legal status necessary to continue to do the work that we so desperately need here in the Central Valley. And this is hard work. Sometimes people call this work, the folks that work out in the fields, low-skilled labor. It's not. If you've ever worked a day in the fields, it's tough work and it's hard to do. And so we need to make sure that we have good qualified people that can continue to do this work, not only for the growers and for the farmers, but also for our community as a whole. And so these are issues that I'm talking about every day. These are issues that I want to work on when I go to Congress. And for me, the approach has to be a comprehensive one. It has to be one that takes everything into consideration. And we need to work to make sure that our dreamers do have a pathway to citizenship, which I think 85+% of Americans agree with me on this point.
Are there any other topics or things that you would like to make sure that we talk about?
For me, just what's going on in the news the last couple of days, something that's very concerning to me with respect to what Trump was asking from the DOJ. So we saw this weekend Trump sending out a tweet basically calling for a new special investigation into what he calls spying within his campaign. And I can tell you, as somebody that works in law enforcement, this tactic of using informants to aid in investigations is something that's not uncommon. And for Trump to categorize it as spying and for Nunes to buy into this and categorize it as spying is completely misleading to the American people. And so we need to make sure that we continue to hold the president accountable. We need to continue to make sure that people like Devin Nunes stop interfering with this Russia investigation, because at the end of the day, we need to figure out what happened and we need to figure out how to stop it. And when you have people like Nunes in Washington working to undermine federal law enforcement and national security, it really hurts our democratic institutions, and not only the criminal justice system, but our elections as a whole. And so this election here in California Congressional District 22 is so important. And so that is why we need to have not only the voters of this district, but the voters of this nation pay attention to what is going on in Washington. And we need to make sure that this is Devin Nunes' last term in Congress. And I'm going to work every day to make sure that that becomes a reality.
If you do win, and if the Congress does become more democratic or flip blue, how do you think we sort of restore the faith of the American people into our institutions on both sides? There's sort of an assault on our institutions in every direction right now. What can Congress do to sort of make sure that people have faith again?
It begins by holding the executive branch accountable for their conduct. And right now, we don't have a Congress that's willing to do that. We don't have a Speaker of the House that's willing to do it. We don't have a House Intelligence Committee chairman that's willing to do that. And so the first step must be to send good, ethical people to Washington, people that have committed their lives to their communities or to public service. And I can tell you, I'm watching a ton of races around the country, and there are so many good people running for office this year. And we're going to have one of the biggest freshman classes coming into Congress in Washington this year. And so we need to set an example for future members of Congress, current members of Congress. And we can do very easy things like pledging not to take any corporate money, but then at the same time, pledging to hold folks in the executive branch, regardless of party affiliation, accountable. And it really comes down to putting country over politics and partisan politics for me. And so it's just so important that we get people involved and energized and engaged in this election. We really see what happens in previous elections where folks stay home. And we've really learned this year and last year that elections do have consequences. And so if there's one takeaway from this interview that your listeners take away, I think that it would be that we need to continue to be vigilant and stay involved and elect good people to Congress.
All right, I agree. And your primary is on Tuesday, June 5th.
Yes, that's correct.
California 22nd, and everybody, make sure you go out and vote. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will put links to your website and your Facebook and Twitter feeds up on our website as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Kelly.
It all starts with Frankenstein. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, which uses the Promethean myth, which her husband Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote about.
And they were both friends with Lord Byron, who kept a bear at Cambridge. It was the key shaper of the Romantic movement, which Oscar Wilde would be at the tail end of when he wrote Dorian Gray, who was influenced by a Yellow Book, which inspired the publication of a magazine called the Yellow Book, which specialised in lustful and violent tales, in which John Buchan was published, according to Benjamin, who wrote about Wilde's arrest. And Buchan wrote the 39 Steps, which later became a Hitchcock film, before he made Psycho, which was based on Ed Gein, who made corpses
into ornaments, unlike Victor Frankenstein, who made a man by grave digging and stitching corpses together.
You done?
Not even slightly.
The Frankenpod. It's a podcast stitched together from the corpses of mystery, noir, gothic literature and cinema. Subscribe to us on your podcast app.
In this segment, I'm speaking with Regina Bateson, who is running for Congress in the California 4th District. Hi, Regina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. What is your background and why are you running for Congress?
So I grew up here in the 4th District. Now, the 4th District is one of the most beautiful places in the state, one of the most beautiful places in the country. We have Yosemite, we have Lake Tahoe here, but to me, this place is really special because it's where I grew up. And I went to our public schools here, worked my first jobs here, doing everything from ice cream scooping to softball umpiring. And then I was actually able to go off to college at Stanford and joined the Foreign Service shortly after 9/11. I worked in Washington, D.C. and Latin America, then went back to school and got my PhD. And I was actually teaching at the university level when I decided to step away from that and run for Congress this year, because this is a time when I think everyone in our country has to step up and do the most that we each can do to make a difference. I think our basic democratic institutions are under assault like they've never been before. And, I took a look around after the 2016 election and decided that the thing I could do to really have the biggest impact would be to take on Tom McClintock, who's our incumbent here in the 4th District. So at this point, I've been running a really grassroots, positive campaign based here in the community for over a year. And we've got a groundswell of support, a lot of engagement from volunteers. We're out there knocking on doors, making phone calls, and we really feel like this is the year that we can unseat Tom McClintock and take back the district and contribute to taking back the House and restoring some balance and accountability to our country.
Are there very many PhDs in Congress right now? Do you know?
There are not many. So I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but there are not many. And I do think that that's something important that I bring to the table. I mean, I'm a very practical, pragmatic, results-oriented person. I'm from a very middle-class background here in our district. My mom's a nurse. My dad worked his way up to eventually working for HP here in our largest town in the district. I'm not really from a particularly fancy background or anything, but I have been able to get some really great training in research methods and in data analysis. And I think we need more of that in government. I mean, I think we need more people who, frankly, understand research and evidence and are committed to evidence-based policymaking. So that is something I would really bring to the table. And I think that across the country right now, we've got a lot of people from kind of unconventional backgrounds running for Congress. People who are not career politicians, people who are not lawyers. No offense to lawyers, but we already have a lot of lawyers in Congress. Right now, we've got scientists running. We've got engineers. We've got doctors. In my case, I'm a social scientist. I've taught research methods to PhD students. So I think that we really have an opportunity to bring in some of those different perspectives to our government this year. And that's really important, especially in the era of Trump and alternative facts. I think that we need to be sending people who understand what it means to look at concrete evidence and really make policy that's based in the real world.
When you were in the Foreign Service, can you talk a little bit about what sort of work you did there and how that gives you an understanding of the kinds of reforms maybe we need in things like immigration in this country?
Absolutely. So I was really motivated to join the Foreign Service because of 9/11, which happened right when I was starting my sophomore year of college. And I really felt that engagement in diplomacy would be the best way to ratchet down some of those tensions and keep our country safe. So I started taking the exams just as soon as I could. I actually passed both the written exam and the oral exam on my first try. And that's how I was able to join the Foreign Service so quickly, just straight after college. I initially went to Washington, D.C., where I did the basic training class. It's called A100. And then because of my Spanish language skills, I actually speak Spanish at a very high professional, near fluent level. The Foreign Service quickly decided that I would be best suited to working in Latin America. So they assigned me to do consular work in Guatemala. And that meant that I got some additional consular training in Washington, D.C. And, particularly in 2004, the Foreign Service was really refocusing to make sure that all consular officers received excellent training in detecting fraudulent applications and border security, because the country was really on high alert. I mean, we were really concerned that the 9/11 hijackers had actually been issued valid visas to enter the U.S. And it was drilled into every person joining the Foreign Service, especially if you were going to do consular work, that we all had a serious burden on our shoulders.